afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our monthly international market update for March 2024. Audio em português também estará disponível. It was great to see many of our clients a couple weeks ago during our visit to Sao Paulo, and we look forward to meeting more clients in the future. For those that don't know us, my name is Niraj Patel, and I'm the Chief Equity Strategist at Itaú. I'm joined by Marcelo Aagesen, who's the Head of Global Markets and Strategy, who is our moderator. Today, we wanted to focus on India, as we have gotten lots of interest from clients, and it is an important economy and market. Also, from a personal standpoint, I also have plenty of interest as my family is originally from India. Currently, the Itaú Private Bank strategy team has an overweight view of emerging market equities, which at the private bank is followed by Rodrigo Lopez. And just to clarify, we don't make recommendations on individual countries within the index, but we are always interested to learn more about important regions that make up the index. The reason behind the overweight view on emerging market equities is due to first, fundamentals, as the start of the US interest rate easing cycle in the US and the US dollar weakness that we see in the medium term can drive strong performance for EM equities. Second, valuation is at a steep discount to other markets like the US, Europe, and Japan. And lastly, positioning is low amongst investors globally to EM equities. We have Gina Baccelli, who just visited India, joining, and we also have brought an outside guest from one of our partners, Franklin Templeton, to discuss their views on the Indian markets. For those that might not know, Franklin Templeton, based in California, manages north of $1 trillion of assets across different strategies globally, with a presence in over 30 countries and has more than 1,000 investment professionals. Lastly, besides the discussion on India, we wanted to give a brief update on how fourth quarter earnings season ended. With that, Marcelo.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you for the introduction as usual. Klaus and Raj, if you don't mind, I'll do a quick intro in Portuguese and we'll kick off. Então, quero agradecer de novo a presença de todos. Obrigado.
Once again, I want to thank everyone for your presence here, for following us in this live session. We want to have a deep dive in India. Gina Baccelli is our chief columnist, who's always with us. We always invite her to be with us here in this live. She was in India recently, like a week ago. She came back from India, and she had a team of the bank with her. They have a very updated perspective now, very fresh after being there for some time. And she will talk about the macro scenario. And we also have Klaus with us. We want to thank him for being here. He's a portfolio manager of one of our partners and a fund devoted to India. He has a lot of experience, more than 20 years working in emerging markets, and a four-star fund, more than 10 billion in assets. So it will be very good to hear his perspective, a different perspective regarding assets allocation and also opportunities that we may find. India has been growing very fast and catching up to become the third largest economy in the world, behind the US and China. But I would like to start with Gina. I'd like to hear from you about your trip and the macro scenario in India. Good afternoon. Thank you, Marcelo and Raj, for the invitation. Good afternoon, Klaus. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about why we went to India. We always like to go to the countries and visit the countries that we work with. So we go to the US, to Europe, we've been to China, and now India, because it's been at a highlighted place, at an important place. Is the second largest burden after China. So it's very important for us to better understand this country. And we have a question to answer. Our clients have been asking if India is the new China. Why? Because we know the impact of China's entry in the global economy after 2004, and after it became part of the World Trade Organization, especially the impact were pretty much uh, as of that point, it was a tipping point. So it's very important for us to know whether India may cause the same impacts China did in the global economy. So I'm going to bring some specific points. I prefer to show you my slides so I can remember everything I plan to bring to you. So we'll start answering this question. Is India the new China? There are a lot of similarities and a lot of differences, but I would say more differences than similarities. When we think about a poor economy, we will see more people in the rural areas. We don't have as many people in the cities. And when, with development, people leave the rural areas to work in the cities, we'll see an increase of productivity. This is natural. And we have a very good demographic bonus or balance because we have a very young population there. Um, China used to have a demographic bonus, and it needed to create a lot of jobs for this population and a lot of opportunities. But when we talk about India, we also see that there are opportunities in infrastructure and housing. So it's still very poor. These things are very similar to China from that period. But there are a lot of differences if you compare it to China. First, it's already a more developed economy in the sector of services if we compare it to China. It's a major exporter of services. When we see the trade balance, it funds about 60% of their deficit in their assets balance because they import a lot of oil and more participation or share in consumption. It could be compared to an average economy. So the savings rate is lower than what China had in the past. So the consumption rate in China is still higher than India, and this is difficult when we think about funding a stronger increase in investment. When we think about investment rates, it's 25-30% of the GDP, which is different from China, which is 40%. And structurally, it's different as well if we compare it to China 20 years ago. They have a more restrictive tax system, a higher debt, public debt. It is a democracy, so it's more difficult to make reforms. I think that Modi's administration did a lot of reforms, but it's harder to do reforms and affect interest groups in a democracy if we compare it to a more authoritarian type of government like in China. And they are in a different stage of development. They want to industrialize, but they can't use the exporting industrial model that China used 20 years ago because it entered the global market when there was no protectionism. The US and Europe were willing to purchase anything sold by China without restriction, but it's changed. The global economy is more of a protectionist economy nowadays. So it's complicated to think about this old model. The world is more protectionist now. There's no room for another China in the global economy. Maybe a share, but not using the same development model, totally based on the exporting and industrial sector. And also, industrialization in China has reached a stage of higher added value. When we see a change in production chains in China, sorry, all the lower added value industries are moving to other countries, poorer countries. When you have very little value added industry, it's not going to China. So the industry that's going to China is what? Apple with higher added value. It's an opportunity, but also a challenge. Let's look at China. It's not the new, sorry, at India. It's not the new China. They're not going to repeat the same experience. They will have to find their own development strategy. And I don't think their growth is going to be as fast as China's. it
commodity que a gente viu,
raised
o
a
crescimento foi
two
tão
digit,
forte que
even with the
a oferta demorou
commodity
para
price
sair, o crescimento
pressures,
em
the
torno de commodity,
supply
e foi
was
isso que afetou
took a
muito a
while
economia
to
brasileira
adjust, and this
nos anos 2000.
affected
Então, eu acho
the
que
Brazilian
isso vai
economy in the
acontecer. Eu acho que a Índia
2000s.
é uma
I don't
história
think this is going to
diferente,
happen with India. I think it's a
é
different
a
story.
própria história, né? Então, o
They
que que
have
eles
their
estão
own
fazendo
story.
lá? O
And what
país
are they
vem
doing there?
crescendo ao redor de 5, 6, teve ano
The
passado
country
que
has been
cresceu mais nos
growing about
últimos
5 to
20
6
anos. Então, eles estão
percent
crescendo
in
bastante.
the
O crescimento é
latest 20
10%,
years.
inflação
So
acelerada
they've
como
been
a China.
growing a lot,
Governo tem
although not
investido
as fast
muito em
as China.
infraestrutura, porque
The
é onde
government
eles
has
têm
been investing a
espaço,
lot in
o housing
infrastructure.
infraestrutura é onde dá
It's
para
where
crescer. Eu
there's
acho que ainda
room
tem
for
muito
investment,
espaço
housing and
nos próximos
infrastructure. As
anos
I mentioned, there is still
para que isso
a lot of
aconteça,
room
né?
in
Eu
the
acho que
next
se
years for
você
this
pegar a
to
China
take
nos últimos
place.
10
If
anos,
we
eles
look at
cresceram
China
igual a
in the
infraestrutura.
recent 10 years,
Então,
it
tem muito
grew
espaço para fazer
on
esse
the
tipo de
top
investimento
of
na Índia.
housing
O
and
governo Modi é
infrastructure.
um governo
So
que
the
fez
same thing
muitas
in
reformas,
India.
melhorou
And
muito
Modi's
o modelo
administration did a
deles,
lot of
assim,
reforms and improved the business
para
environment
se aproveitar dessa ideia da China
to
mais um,
get
né,
an
dessa ideia da
advantage
realocação da
China
produção
plus one, the
e
reallocation of
eles
production
querem
coming
sim
from
pegar
China. They do
indústrias
want
até
to
que fiquem mais
absorb
valorizadas
industries
nessa
that
parte
have
de
a higher
eletrônicos,
added
indústria
value,
tem
like
muito na Índia.
electronics, for example.
Então,
It's
eles
been
estão
growing a lot
procurando investir
in
em fora,
India,
fazendo
and
reforma
they are
estrutural, investindo
improving the
em
business
infraestrutura,
environment,
para
investing in
atrair
infrastructure.
investimento,
This
porque
is
cai o
all
custo
to
de
attract
logística,
investments
né? O meio de
because you
transporte
have a
muito
lower
elevado.
cost of
Então,
logistics, a
eu
better
acho que
business
eles têm
rating, and
oportunidades,
so
né? Substituir
they do have
importação, tem vários setores em que eles
opportunities
acho que
to
até conseguem
replace
substituir
imports in
importação,
some sectors. They'll
importação
be
baseada na
able to
China,
do that,
no
even
setor
imports
farmacêutico,
coming from
e
China,
eles
the
têm
pharmaceutics
muitas
industry.
oportunidades
And
nessa
they do have
transição
a lot of
energética. Eles são muito
opportunities also
dependentes
in the energy transition because they depend a
importam
lot
muito
on
petróleo, eles geram energia elétrica
oil
usando
importing. They
gás, energia
generate
elétrica
electric
gerando
energy,
carvão. Então,
half of
a
it
transição
using
energética
coal.
também é um setor que
So
está
the
muito
energy
acelerado.
transition
Mas
is
eu acho que,
very
assim, para
important,
mim, o
and
que mais
it's
chama atenção, a
a
principal
sector that has been accelerating recently.
highlight
But I would
da Índia é
highlight
essa questão da
one thing in
digitalização
India,
acelerada que a gente
the
tem visto lá, que
accelerated
isso vai
digitalization.
realmente
We
isso
can talk
me
about
chamou a
that
atenção,
in
assim, vindo de um Brasil em
in
que
a
a gente
while
de um país que tem essa experiência do
because
Pix, que foi
you can
uma
look
experiência
at Brazil. We
para
have the experience at
fiscalização,
PIX,
foi uma experiência para
PIX. So
nós assim
this
surpreendente.
experience
Eu
that
acho que
for
a
us was
Índia
very
é ainda
surprising. But I
mais
think India is
incrível o que eles
even
fizeram lá com essa parte
more
de digitalização.
incredible when we talk about digitalization.
Eu acho que é um ótimo gancho para a próxima pergunta,
I think
Gina.
we
Muito
can
obrigado, porque o panorama ficou bem claro. Você fez uma
ask the
comparação com
next
a China,
question
que
that
é
algo
algo
has a lot
que a
to
gente
do
escuta muito, que é
with
o
how
que
you finished your
vai ser o
talk.
motor de crescimento global, né? Então,
So
quando
it was
alavanca
very important to hear your answer to this
mundial e
question whether
a
India
gente
will
sabe que
be
o
the new
commodity tem feito
China.
ali o Brasil
And
sofrer
even
bastante.
commodities,
Assim,
well,
ele não, como ele não, a Índia não vai crescer tão
India
aceleradamente
is
como a
not going to
China,
grow
né?
as
Porque
fast as
para
China did.
ser o drive da economia global como a China
So
foi nos últimos anos,
having
eu acho difícil. A
this
economia ainda é muito
drive
menor.
being
Mas
the
eles vão
equivalent to
crescer
China
muito,
as it was 20 years ago,
eu
I
acho que
don't
eles vão
believe it
fazer
is.
sucesso nos
It will be
próximos
like
anos
it, but I
aí.
think they will
É
have
muito
a
desafios todos, né, que a gente
successful
precisa lidar.
case, a successful
A gente
story, although there are a lot of
entendeu que
challenges, of
não é
course.
uma história, não é a segunda história de China, é uma história própria de Índia.
It's
É.
not another China, it's
Mergulhado e entendido.
its
E
own
eu acho que essa é a
story,
próxima
India.
pergunta.
So I'll
E
ask
para
the
fechar
next
esse negócio,
question.
legal, você deu um
So
panorama, mostrou o
what
cenário,
you
vamos onde
showed
estamos,
the
como é que é o
overview, the
país, como é que vai
economic
ser.
scenario,
O que
what the
está
country is
acontecendo
like,
em
but
julho,
what
Marcelo,
is
para a gente
happening?
fechar?
What's
Então,
new
assim,
in
o que me
India
chamou
from
muita
now
atenção. Então,
on?
aqui, assim,
Okay,
só para
so
a
I'll
gente
show
entender,
you
esse quadro
this
do State of
image.
India, eles fizeram uma apresentação
It's
econômica muito bacana para
it was a
gente.
presentation given by
E
the
aí,
State
assim,
Bank of India, and I
descrevendo
took the
tudo que,
slide
que o
to
governo
bring
fez
it
de
to you.
reforma,
They
muitas
described
reformas nesses últimos
everything
10
that the
anos,
government did, a lot of
né?
reforms in the last 10
Muitas
years.
dessas reformas aí voltando para essa coisa da
A lot of
digitalização
them have to
econômica. E
do
aí
with
todos os
digitalization,
impactos,
as I
né?
said, and there has been a lot of
Estabilidade
impacts.
macro,
A macro
melhorou os
stability was
negócios, né? Então a Índia
improved, the
escalou
business
vários níveis na
environment, it
infraestrutura
scaled a
deles,
lot
foram
of
vários estados
levels in the
gigantes,
business world in terms of
aumentou a
rankings,
produtividade, quer dizer, eles estão
increase of
fazendo
productivity.
muita coisa nessa
They
área de
have been
reforma
doing a
estrutural.
lot
Mas eu acho
in
assim,
terms of
para mim o que
structural
chamou
reforms.
atenção muito foi essa
But
questão da
what was
digitalização
very
da
special for
economia,
me
né? Que
was
eles
the
tinham, que
digitalization of
começou
the
com o programa
economy.
chamado
It
Digital
started with a program called Digital India. Then they started using the STAP, which is a combination of apps and devices and digital devices and instruments that impacted the economy. First, they created a digital ID
Gov.br
we
né?
have in
Então ela
Brazil,
é uma forma de reconhecer a sua
gov.br. It's
identidade
a way of
digital,
recognizing your
e
digital
antigamente
identity
essa é uma forma de
electronically.
você ser
And
visto
then you
no
have
Banco
access to a lot
Central.
of
Os gringos não
services.
tinham isso. Eles criaram uma
They didn't have
característica
that, and they
digital que
created that recently,
atingiu milhões de pessoas,
and it
porque são
reached
90%
millions of
90% da
people.
população. Depois eles criaram um sistema de pagamento
Then they
eletrônico
created
parecido
an
com o Pix, que
electronic
você, né, usa o
payment
pagamento
system
eletrônico, você
similar to
pode
our
pagar
Pix,
transações, só
and
que
you
esse
can make
sistema de pagamento
transactions, but
eletrônico,
this
ele cria
system
um histórico
creates a
próprio
history,
seu,
your own history
de seus
of
pagamentos. Isso vira
payments.
meio que um score, um estoque
This
de
turns
crédito
into
que as
a
empresas de crédito podem
score
usar para fazer
or
várias coisas.
that
Então vira assim, você
credit
comprou, você
companies
já
can
gastou, você
use. So they
pagou,
see where you
e
bought what, how much you paid for
esse
it,
arquivo
how
é
much you
seu.
spent,
Então
and
você
this
pode
is a
dar
file that belongs to you.
acesso a um banco
You can
ou uma
give
fintech
a bank
democraticamente,
access to it or a
acessar e
fintech,
tirar. Então isso
and you can
aumentou
also
muito
take it back.
a
So it
competição nesse
has
sistema, porque
increased a lot of
esse histórico é
competition
da pessoa,
in the
né?
system because the
Daí
history
eles
begins
fizeram
to the individual.
uma redução de custo de
And then
conta
they
bancária, né?
had
Um
a
know your client,
reduction
que é para
of
receber a carteira de identidade
bank
digital, você usa um
accounts
know your client,
costs.
e aí abriu uma
So
conta
you
corrente
have a know your
bancária,
client,
né?
you open a
Corrente
current account,
digital, que isso
a
criou uma
digital current
bancarização
account that
enorme,
has
né?
created a
Assim, a
huge
bancarização de 20 para
spread of
80%,
bank
eu acho, os
use
números que eu tenho, depois
from
Claus
20
me
to
corrige aqui,
80% of the population.
né?
I don't know
Então,
if I
assim,
got
aumentou
it
muito a
mistaken. Maybe
bancarização.
Klaus
E
can
aí,
correct me if I
assim,
got the numbers wrong. But
para
finally,
dar um acesso,
in
uma
order
inclusão, né,
to
das pessoas mais
include
pobres no
poorer
sistema,
people in the
eles reduziram
system,
muito o custo da internet e do
they've
celular.
reduced a
Você
lot
vê lá
of
que
the
criou lá sua
cost of
página, né?
internet and mobile
Uma internet super
phones.
barato. Então, com isso, você
Internet
tem
is really cheap. You
1,2
can get
milhões
very
agora
cheap
de
mobile phones.
celulares
So you have
no
a
mundo, quase
huge
todo mundo.
number
Então, isso
of
trouxe uma inclusão
internet and
social
mobile phones.
absurda.
So
A
it
partir do
included a
governo
lot of
começou a
people.
fazer
Most
transferência de
people
renda
actually, government
usando
started to doing
esses
income
instrumentos.
transfer
Então,
programs using
transfer
these
de renda
tools.
direto para conta das pessoas que
Direct
estiverem muito longe
income
disso.
transfer
É uma coisa
in
que
very
muda,
remote
né? Isso
areas. It
a
does
inclusão
change
digital
a
e a
lot.
inclusão
Digital
social,
inclusion is a
ela
social
muda, né,
inclusion. It does
a história
change the
do país. E aí você
scenario and the
tem
history of the country.
uma grande digitalização da economia,
And
e
then
aí
you
tem
see
todas
this major
as
digitalization of the
externalidades. Então,
economy,
claro,
and there are a
então,
lot of
uma
externalities and
criação de fintech
impacts, like the
financeira, uma
creation of
possibilidade enorme do
financial
e-commerce, que
fintechs, a
a
huge
conta
possibility
bancária
for
em dar, criar um
e-commerce. It's the next step they
marketplace
want to give
em
to
que os
create
pequenos
a
negócios não
marketplace
estão, é uma
where small
economia muito de pequenos
businesses can
negócios ainda,
thrive.
bastante
There are a lot
fragmentada,
of
ou
small businesses. Most
empregada na
part of the
agricultura,
population
ou em
is
pequenos
either
negócios,
working
ou
in
é informal,
agriculture or
né?
small businesses or informal
Pouca
workers.
parte da população está
A
empregada no
very
setor formal,
small
então esse
share of the
e-commerce vai dar
population has a formal
esse
job.
marketplace, né,
So
vai ser um
this
e-commerce que vai dar
marketplace they
acesso
want
para
to
pequenas
create will
empresas
give
de terem mais
access
acesso ao mercado, mais
for
demanda,
small businesses to have more access
e aí, quer
to
dizer, essa
markets, to
digitalização
have a
criou
higher
esse
demand.
universo
And
que
the
dos unicórnios,
digitalization
né,
allowed
hoje é a
also
terceira maior economia
the
emergente
opportunities
e
for
está indo muito.
unicorns. It's the third largest
Então, trouxe
market for
tudo, né?
unicorns in the
Digitalização,
world. They can do
saúde,
anything with
educação,
digitalization,
tudo isso
health,
você consegue
education, whatever you
aproveitar ali
think
dessas
you can
oportunidades. Então, essa
use
digitalização
it
criou
as a
muita
tool. So
oportunidade
it
no
has
Brasil.
created
E
a
aí
lot
eu
of
acho que
business
isso também
opportunities, the
veio o
digitalization, I
setor da
mean.
educação. Eu acho
And
que
also,
o celular,
when we talk about
o
education,
digital,
this is what I think about
eles não precisam
digital
saber
or
ler
mobile.
para usar
Maybe the
um
person
celular.
doesn't even
Ela
need to know
consegue
how to
mexer no
read
celular,
to
ela,
use a
né?
mobile
Você pode
phone.
até educar a pessoa pelo celular.
You can
Então, é uma
teach the
ferramenta legal
person
de
through a
educação
mobile
positiva.
phone. So it's a
Então, muita
major
atenção. Eu acho que
tool
isso
for
tem um
inclusion.
desdobramento,
And
você
I
vai
think it
tirar
will
condições
unfold into a
grandes
lot of
assim
things, and
de
it will
crescimento.
create
Então, é o que eu
very
disse,
important
há 20
conditions for
anos atrás, quando
growth.
a China começou, essa
20 years
coisa da
ago, when
digitalização
China
nem existia,
started,
né? Não é, né?
digitalization
Eles foram ali no
wasn't
básico, modelo
even
industrial,
existing. They
produzir
went to the
bens de
basic
massa,
industrial
né,
model
com muita mão de
producing
obra. Então, eu acho que a história do
mass
crescimento da China
goods.
passou,
So
ainda
I
precisa
think
passar
that
por outras
India,
coisas,
that
inclusive
their
por
history
essa
of growth will go through
digitalização
other
acelerada
things,
que
especially
eles
the
estão indo, todas
accelerated
as oportunidades que
digitalization
isso aí
they've
vai
been
criar.
working on and all the opportunities it will bring. Excellent, a very well-told story. When we look at having a digital ID and then going all the way to social inclusion and education and so on.
E o lado negativo da coisa? Quais são
What
as
about
Eu acho
the
que,
dark side or
eu
the
acho que
negative
assim,
side?
tem muita oportunidade
There are a lot of
aí,
opportunities,
né? Então, assim, até
undoubtedly.
listei aqui tudo que eu vi, né?
I've even
De
listed everything I saw,
oportunidades
as you can
de
see
crescimento.
here,
A
in
China é
terms
mais
of
uma
growth
que a
opportunities, China plus one, to
Deixa eu te
diversify
informar
from
sobre
China, to
informação,
replace
setores
imports with the
farmacêutico,
fertilizers and pharmaceutics sector,
continuar investindo na
continue
produção e exportação de
investing
brinquedos. O
on
Brasil tem na
the
Apple já
production and
10% de
exports of
mercado
electronics,
na
which is
Índia.
already
Energia
10% in
verde, que também
India.
fazer essa
Green
transação.
energy, they need to do this
Aumentar a participação do
transition
setor de
to increase
serviços,
the
né, fazer
participation in
afinamento,
the sector of
aço,
services. I
também
think there's
criar
still room for it. They want to create
setor de defesa, porque a Índia importava
a
muito
sector of
equipamento militar e
defense because
agora
they used to
é uma
import a
crise que
lot
a
of
gente
military
identifica
equipment. It's harder
esse
now.
setor,
So
então
they
acho que é um
want to
setor que vai
create a
crescer e
sector
no
for
mundo todo, né? O
defense,
mundo todo investe
not
muito
only in India, but I think the
defesa.
whole world will be
Melhorar a
investing in defense
infraestrutura, e eu
to
acho que tem
improve
uma coisa importante
infrastructure.
que é a
And
renda
there's
per
something
capita
really
vai
important here. The
crescendo,
per
atingindo
capita
níveis que a
income,
gente tem uma
it's growing
disponibilidade
and it
dessa
will reach
demanda, né? Então,
a
assim, a
level
pessoa
that
fica um pouco mais
will
rica
uh,
e aí aumenta
unblock demand
exponencial,
in
né, a
various
demanda por
sectors. It's exponential.
housing,
The demand for
saúde,
housing,
educação,
health
viagens. Então,
services,
a gente vê
education,
isso no Brasil,
trips. We
né?
saw that happening in
Trazendo
Brazil
a
as
gente, de maneira
well.
geral, né?
In the
A
emerging
criação dos
markets
grandes
in
classes
general, the
médias,
creation
depois do
of the
pós-Covid dos
large
anos 2000. Então, a Índia, eu acho que
middle
ainda vai ter muito que
class. I
passar por
think
isso.
India will go
A renda
through
per
that.
capita ainda é
In my
2.500
view,
dólares,
the
mas vai
the
crescer
per
e vai
capita
chegar
income is still
nessa coisa de
2.5
destravar esse
um,
consumo muito
thousand
forte. E aí é o que eu falei, a gente vai
$2,500.
crescendo essa conquista
So
da
we still
digitalização.
need to
Onde que
see
eu
the
acho que tem
benefits
risco?
of
Eu acho que assim, o
digitalization. But
governo,
where do I see
assim, é
risks?
impressionante. A gente vai visitar lá
When
o
we visit,
discurso, é tudo muito
we
certo, a
hear
gente quer
a
fazer
lot of
reformas, a gente quer,
things
né,
that
melhorar
government
o
wants
ambiente
to
de
make
negócio,
reforms
porque
to
a gente acha
improve
que
the
isso
business
precisa ser melhorado. Então,
environment
assim, eu acho que o
because
discurso está muito
we
certo.
we
Onde
think
que tem
infrastructure is
risco?
important. They
Eu
have
acho
a
que
very
tem
good
risco político. A gente tem uma
discourse, but
eleição
there is
agora
a
na
political
Índia,
risk. They will
e,
have an election now.
e tudo indica que o primeiro-ministro Modi
And
vai
maybe
conseguir um
the
terceiro
prime
mandato esse
minister
ano.
will
Mas,
get a
assim, não está muito
third
claro como vai
term,
ser a transição
but
depois. Daqui
it's
5
not
anos ele
as
vai ter que
clear
assumir
as
de novo.
how
E aí tem
this
que ter
transition
uma
will be done because he
transição,
will be
enfim. E assim, eu acho
79
que o risco político é sempre
in 4 years.
complicado,
So I
porque é
think that the
mais
political
difícil, como eu
risk is
falei, fazer
complicated.
muita reforma numa
It's more
democracia. Você
difficult
precisa
to
ter
do a
muito
lot of
apoio.
reforms in a
Você precisa
democracy.
ter
You need
uma
to have a lot
lei
of
por
support. So if
maioria,
you're not
né? Tem
elected
maioria
by
no
a
Congresso,
majority,
tem
you don't have
muito
a
partido,
majority
enfim,
in
para
in the
cabeça. Então,
parliament,
isso é um
then you have
risco para a
another
continuação
party.
desse
This is a
movimento,
risk for
assim,
the
mais
continuation
estrutural
of
de
this more
reforma na
structural
Índia. Eu
movement
acho que o segundo
for
risco
the
é isso.
economy.
As
And the
situações
second risk
da
is
Índia são muito
geopolitical. Their
complicadas, né?
borders are
Como a
very
gente sabe, né?
complicated.
Nessa
We know
relação
that.
China, Paquistão,
This conflict
tem
with
uma
China,
questão, inclusive doméstica,
and even
dos muçulmanos. Eu
domestically
acho que essa
speaking,
questão
the
geopolítica
Muslims.
religiosa
So the
é um risco,
geopolitical
né?
religious
E eu acho que o terceiro
perspective
risco da Índia ainda é a
is a
plataforma
risk. And the
elétrica.
third risk,
Embora
I
o plano de
think it will be
pagamento
the
tenha melhorado
payment
muito, como eu disse, hoje a
balance. I
exportação de
think
serviços
that
já financia uma
exports
boa
of
parte desse
services
plano.
already
Eles têm
fund
muita
a lot of
dependência
the current
importação
accounts,
petróleo.
but they depend a
Se der
lot
um
on
choque de
import of
petróleo que
oil.
aumenta muito o preço do petróleo,
So
o
if
barril
there's
de
a
pagamento
shock
vai
and
aumentar
the
débito com
oil
concorrente, isso sempre
prices
afeta
go
a
up,
moeda,
it
né? Então,
does
assim, essa é a
affect
clássica
everything,
questão
the
que envolve a gente. E o
currency,
Brasil
those
não se
problems that
escapou,
are so
porque o nosso barril de
typical of
pagamento é
emerging markets.
muito
We
financiado
did
por
escape
FDI,
from
então a
it
gente
because we have a
acaba
funding
sofrendo
from the
também, né?
FDI, but
Direta
we see
com
that
essa conta de
happening
pagamento, porque
in
países que não
India,
têm
but we don't
essa
have the same
viabilidade. Hoje nós somos exportador
frailty.
líquido de petróleo, então
We
somente para
are
exportar para nós é bom.
net exporters of
É meio
oil,
Brasil dos anos
so
70, quando aumentava
it's
muito o preço
like
do
Brazil in
petróleo.
the
Esse é uma
70s
fragilidade. Apesar do
when
plano de
the price
pagamento
of
ser muito
oil
moderno,
increased a lot.
certo,
They do
viável,
have
é
reserves,
uma
they have
fragilidade, porque situações externas
other things,
sempre
but
limitam um
it's a
pouco
point of
o ritmo da
frailty
Índia, né?
because if
Então,
you have an external
para a
crisis, it
Índia
will
são
limit
os riscos.
their
Mas, enfim, eu acho
economy.
que é uma história de
But I
sucesso, uma
think
história
it
positiva que
is
a
a
Índia
very
tem
successful
vindo
story, and it
6, 5, 7.
will
Aqui não é
it's
só
very
guerra,
likely
aqui
that
é,
will
né, uma coisa
grow and will
que tem muita
increase. It's not
oportunidade
accelerated, but there's a lot of
acontecendo por aqui.
opportunities for us to
Obrigado, Gina.
see the
Com certeza vai
growth.
ter algumas perguntas de
Tá
clientes.
bom.
Maybe
I would
we'll
like
have
to
some
shift
questions from
now,
our
maybe
client.
shift towards a little bit more towards markets. Klaus, I do apologize. Probably my introduction was a little bit too shy to your brilliant career. So if you want to add into that, please do so. Over 20 years in emerging markets, heading this huge fund as as a CIO and portfolio manager. But also, I would love to hear Frank Templeton's view on India and markets and the fund itself that you guys are managing. Thank you very much for joining us again. You might be on mute.
Now I'm not. Now you can hear me. Sorry.
Yeah, that's probably the
Yeah.
sentence we heard the most since the pandemic hit. You're mute, Claus, you're mute. That's awesome. No, now we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. So now you can hear me. Okay, good. Um, yeah. Let me show some slides on on Franklin Templeton on India in India as well. So as you mentioned, we are a very big investment company, over 1.4 trillion in assets under management. Uh, and Franklin Templeton is a kind of a conglomerate, a holding company of very different asset managers in all types of asset classes: fixed income, equity, alternatives, and multi-asset.
Well,
And our yes.
sorry, I don't think you're sharing the slides yet. I think we can
Oh,
still see Gina's screen.
it's loading.
It's loading.
Yeah.
My God. Oh, there you go.
New share. Sorry.
Now we can see it. Yeah, go ahead.
Now
Sorry.
you can see it. Okay. So um, perfect. So you can see the yeah. So that's the slide behind it. So we Franklin Templeton is a large asset manager across all asset classes, and our India fund uh, group is within equity, emerging frontier markets, and we are in the market in India for already more than 30 years. So our local operation in India was founded in 1993. We have a very large team there, 16 members in the investment teams, and we cover around 400 companies in the Indian stock market. The Indian stock market is very large, so we cover around 95% of the market capitalization of the Indian stock market. Also very important, we are mostly a local manager in India. About three quarters of what we do of the money that we manage, over 11 billion US dollars, is for Indian investors with different fund offerings, and only about a quarter is for international investors outside of India. And very important, the team in India is not isolated in India. They are well integrated and connected to our global emerging markets equity team. They are part of the team. They are providing all the research that we are using in our global emerging markets equity funds, in our Asia funds, and for companies in India. So a part of the overall platform, this has very big advantages. So they are not sitting there alone. They get their views challenged. They they get into discussions with their colleagues around the world. They share best practices and ideas about certain industries. So this is a big add-on, which is not very normal in for Indian asset managers. So I think that's we basically have the best of both worlds there. We have a global asset manager, and we have a global emerging markets manager, plus a very strongly rooted Indian asset manager. Our India strategy is a long-term approach, bottom up. So we are doing stock research, focus on market leaders, on quality companies. Also, corporate governance is a strong part of our investment practice, and the strategy has been very successful over the long term, providing very robust returns for investors. So we are very proud of our offering that we have in the Indian market and how we are positioned there.
That's awesome. Very impressive. Thank you very much, Klaus. What about your thoughts about the India market itself? Like, where are the opportunities? How are you seeing the market, and knowing that you have such a local strong presence helps even more?
Yeah, the Indian market in the past, it has been quite neglected. It has often been in the shadow of China, which has over the last 10, 15, even 20 years grabbed much more headlines. But India has always been a very active and large market. It was also investable for foreign investors many years before the Chinese market, for example. And the Indian market is one of the largest stock exchanges globally. So if you look at Mumbai, you have more than 5,000 companies listed. Not all are investable, but 5,000 listings, that's more than what you have at the New York Stock Exchange, for example. So you have all types of companies listed across all sectors. The exchange has been growing. On the 23rd of January, we had some very interesting news. The Indian Stock Exchange was, I think it was for the first time, bigger than the Hong Kong Stock Exchange and became the fourth largest stock exchange by market capitalization on a global scale, with a market capitalization of around 4.3 trillion US dollars. So that's a lot of zeros. And obviously there's some market volatility, so it's not every day that they are bigger. So they are competing currently head to head. One day Hong Kong is bigger, one day India is bigger, but this shows you a little bit the magnitude of the Indian Stock Exchange. Also very important, retail investors, individual investors are playing an increasingly important role in the Indian stock market. And not only as speculators, but there's a lot of inflows into the Indian equity market through regular savings plans, through funds mainly. And this way, about $2 billion US are invested by local investors on a monthly basis in the Indian equity market. So a quite impressive number, I find. But what attracts investors to India? Obviously, as in most emerging markets, growth. If you compare India to most advanced economies and also to emerging markets economies, the growth outlook for the next 3 to 5 years is better than in any other major economy. So we are seeing average growth rates of around 6%, can be more, 7% in real term, which is outstanding if you compare it to other major economies. So this is one reason why investors start looking at India. And if you can see, as you can see on the right hand side, India is also gaining already over the last 30 years, but increasingly in the last few years, importance in the global economy, and is currently the 5th largest economy in nominal terms, about to overtake Germany and also Japan very soon to become the 3rd largest economy globally. So it's a player that has really gained in importance over the last few years. And if you look currently, it's also a relatively robust market or a country in economic terms. It's the country currently where the markets see the lowest probability of a recession. So it's at 0%. In Brazil, you are a little bit, only a little bit weaker, 10%, but also still in the top group. I'm currently in Germany, so that's an unfortunate 73% chance of a recession. So I may see some soon if I'm not already in one. But India is a completely different picture here. What has the market done over the last 20 years? It has been an extremely profitable market for investors. So if you look at really long-term returns of more than 10% annualized, so each year 10% and more on returns, this is unmatched by emerging markets, by Asia ex-Japan, and by China. And we are seeing a similar picture also for shorter time periods. So this has been an extremely interesting, profitable market for investors over the long term, although it has not gained probably the attention that it deserved over the last few years. Yeah, to close on the market view, we therefore have a very good translation of GDP growth into market returns in India. That is not the case in all emerging markets. So there are countries that have much more volatility, where the transmission was not as straight and as pronounced as in India. China was good as well, but not as good as India. And if you see the robust macroeconomic outlook in connection with what we have seen in the market in the last 20 years, one can be optimistic as regards to returns that can be achieved over the medium to long term in the Indian market in the coming years.
Perfect. Awesome. Very constructive. And I think the data supports a lot in terms of growth coming forward. Coming next. So thank you for that. And maybe, and Gina mentioned a couple of things in terms of digitalization and that spillover in terms of productivity, and also at some point even healthcare, maybe some, but maybe some of the sectors or the teams that you guys are more, let's call, overweight in the India market.
Yes, of course. So there are some very interesting, exciting themes that we have identified in the Indian market. I would like to show you some examples also. Obviously, one theme is consumption. Consumption is the classical theme in emerging markets, increasing per capita income, increasing obvious first basic consumption, then also discretionary consumption. And in India, we are entering a period where we are getting more discretionary consumption, and this is only expected to accelerate in the coming years. One example that I personally found very interesting and that surprised me, to be honest, was that India is the largest importer of Scotch whiskey globally by volume. And this is only since 2022, they are in the first spot, passing France, which are apparently a very strong whiskey consumer, not only wine. Brazil is not very far behind on the fourth spot. But yeah, impressive numbers, and showing also what is a nice example of discretionary example. It's not only cars, it's not only electronics, it can also be luxury spirits, alcohol, like in the case of whiskey. And in line with this, I also learned that India is a major producer of top whiskies itself. So normally you are thinking, if you, or at least me, when I'm thinking about whiskey, I'm thinking about Scotland, fog, cold weather, but apparently you can also produce very good whiskey in India's warmer climate and also receive international prizes for it. So very interesting, and an example what it can mean to have more consumption. And this is we are obviously invested in consumer companies, also in companies that are in spirits, for example.
We're actually part of a whiskey club, myself and Raj. We're gonna try Indian.
Yes, please try and let me know. So I prefer wine, so that there obviously India is not the right country to look for something new. But yeah, whiskey is. I ask a friend, it must really be a nice experience. So yeah, infrastructure, also an investment theme in India. And here an example, India is extending its network of metro lines. So it has increased already to 20 cities with metro lines over the last 10 years. And the plans are to expand this metro networks to 50 cities in India. So this will hopefully make traffic lighter in India. And I briefly talked with Gina ahead of the call today, and traffic in India is really an experience. So every metro must be welcome. It's even if you are coming from Sao Paulo, the traffic in India is special, and I think you may even come back to a traffic jam in Sao Paulo and be relieved compared to India. So building out infrastructure is very important, and important steps are taken here as well. And if you're looking at the stock exchange, there are companies in cement, in doing project management, engineering, where you can invest in to benefit from this long-term trend. Another example is digital transformation. Gina already raised this as well. I would like to give you the example of delivery. And my thesis is it was actually India that invented food delivery 120 years ago with the Dabbawalas in Mumbai originally. And I find this always a very fascinating system, bringing lunch from the kitchen of a housewife to the desk of the husband, and this across the whole city. They keep it warm. It is all delivered in these small boxes. So it's really a system that has attracted even studies from Harvard because it's so unique, and also movies. So if you have the opportunity to see Lunchbox, maybe it's still on Netflix. It's there you can see how the system works, and it's wrapped into a very nice love story. So this is the origins of delivery, but now for 10 years we also have the modern delivery that you can see in all the cities all over the world, based on apps. And here the market is divided among two players. The largest one would be Zomato. Not tomato, Zomato, but the shirts are tomato red as well. And they are still expanding quite rapidly. It's a company that only went public 3 years on the stock exchange and was within the first wave of internet companies coming to the stock exchange in India. So a new segment that only relatively recently joined the market. Going to another trend that we are seeing in India, and it was also already mentioned by Gina, is manufacturing, attracting manufacturing capacity. And one successful example is the production of mobile phones, initially by Samsung, but now also by Apple. And the first idea was to subsidize production in India in order to substitute imports. But this has changed now. Increasingly, mobile phones are exported out of India. And for example, Apple, last year they already produced about 10% of the iPhone 15 in India. And the target for 2025 is to produce about 18% of all iPhones in India. So a very fast development over less than 10 years. And also a success in relocating industry, obviously helped by the more recent trend of relocating production capacity out of China into other countries globally. Yeah, so there are many other trends and industries that are very interesting. If you look at where we find opportunities, healthcare was mentioned. We are investing in hospital chains in India. So there's a very broad choice of interesting companies and sectors in the Indian market.
Perfect. That was super complete. Thank you, Klaus. And I think kicking off with an overview in terms of the macro background and understand what are the pillars and the risks and opportunities coming from Gina, and then driving into how big is the market, how the development of India market has been, and also the themes, the thematic that you guys have been playing, being consumption, discretionary or not, structure, the digital transformation. I think that was mentioned more than once during the live, and manufacturing and other themes that you have. I think that was very complete, and I really appreciate it. By the way, I'm going to switch to Portuguese very fast. Está disponível na plataforma. O fact sheet é muito legal, é legal acompanhar.
The fact sheet is really amazing. It's very interesting to follow. You can talk to your investor, to your banker. This topic has been looked at more closely, and Gina went on a trip, as I said, in the whole mission. So it's interesting to talk about India and look at it.
Hear a little bit about again, changing topics drastically. Well, still markets, I guess, but in terms of the Q4 earnings, and if we can add some of the discussion that we were having before the live in terms of the U.S. Elections, that will be very useful as well, Raj.
Yeah, I mean, just to give a quick update to everyone in terms of, since our last update, we got the rest of U.S. Quarterly earnings for fourth quarter and guidance as well. I think the one that I think a lot of investors were interested in and waiting for was NVIDIA, of course, and NVIDIA ultimately did have good results, so that did help markets, probably help markets globally, because it is such a big driver with artificial intelligence and AI being such a big theme. The other companies that reported were the U.S. retailers, so companies like Walmart, Home Depot, Lowe's, and there the trends for the fourth quarter were strong. I think again, it should not be a surprise. The holiday season was very, very strong, but I think what came out of the earnings results from those companies was that you're still seeing good spending heading into this year and starting the first quarter of this year. So again, you're seeing consumer spending, consumption in the U.S. Holding up and being continuing to be strong. If you look at the overall earnings season in aggregate, companies for the fourth quarter beat by around 7% in the S&P 500. So that is larger than the typical 4 to 5% earnings beat that you get on a typical quarter. And I think the other thing that's unique to start the year is typically when you have the start of a year, analyst estimates tend to be a little bit elevated. You see companies trying to guide to more reasonable levels and bring some of those estimates down. And you've actually have not seen much of a correction in terms of 2024 estimates, meaning that we're starting up the year maybe a slightly stronger footing. Typically, companies will say, "Look, we want to rebase and set expectations a little bit lower." You actually have not seen the typical. It tends to be around 5 to 7% correction or reduction in earnings, and you're not seeing that. Outside of earnings, you mentioned the election. Look, we're we're moving along the election cycle here in the U.S. We now know the candidates from both major parties. On the Democrat, obviously Joe Biden. On the Republican, Trump. There's still other non-Democrat and Republican candidates that are being talked about. RFK Jr. and others, but the two main candidates have now solidified what looks like to be the nominees. We're going to still have to progress through the convention. We did have the State of the Union, and so that is typically not to be. It's not meant to be part of the campaign, but I think this was unique because we are in an election year, so it was used as maybe a platform to kind of launch the campaign for Joe Biden. And look, there's going to be a lot going on this year. We plan to have market updates with the election topic. So we do want to keep everyone informed on what's going on with the election. So, tune in and make sure that you listen to those as well to get kind of up-to-date views on what's going on with the elections.
Perfeito. E lembrando que a gente está no meio do nosso comitê de investimento, né, Gina? Essa semana.
We're in the middle of our
Entrando
investment
nesse primeiro
committee
comitê,
meeting.
no comitê, a gente estava construtivo com
Entering the
os
committee,
rating
we're very
americanos,
constructive
bons
with the
da
American investment
mercado
grade
americanos e mercado de equities e emerging markets.
and also the
importantíssimo,
equities
inclusive.
and emerging
E agora
markets.
está na discussão se a gente faz com tanta coisa acontecendo.
Now
se a gente faz
we've
umas
been
alterações que
discussing
devem sair nos próximos dias.
about having a new
I
decision or
received
not.
Probably north of 10 questions. I don't think we're going to have time. We're going to try to reply to all of them probably via email or reaching out through the banker for specific clients. But I do want to thank you, Klaus, for joining us today. It was very, very informative. I was taking notes on the whiskey part, so that was very extremely helpful. I appreciate that. Gina, prazer como sempre te receber aqui. Obrigado por trazer o
Gina, it's always a pleasure to have you here.
das
Thank you for the
sua análise
overview
detalhada de linha.
you brought
Klaus,
from your
thank you very much.
trip,
Always a
and
pleasure. E obrigado a todos os clientes que participaram da live hoje.
Thank you, everyone.
I would like to thank all the clients for participating in this live.